Hey, look at that. There was movement for a team not called the Dodgers. And this team may be playing late into October.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. If you want to follow me, I am at Instagram at Sully Baseball Podcast. Once every 45 months, I check Sully Baseball at Blue Sky. But the best way to get a hold of me is right here in the comments section if you're following me on the YouTubes. And if you're not following us on the YouTubes, why aren't you? Go subscribe to us at Locked On MLB. Tell your friends. Tell 500,000 of your friends and have them do the same. So let's just talk a little bit. And we got some people already in the chat there. And hey, Jeffrey Humphreys, good evening. Good evening back to you. And same with Daniel Berry Sports Highlights. He says, yo. A big move today as we're just a few weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. The offseason will be officially over. And so some of these, Bregman needs to find a home. Pete Alonso needs to find a home. And the Dodgers can't sign everyone. Paul Sewald, he signed with Cleveland. I think that's a nice pickup for Cleveland. But one of the big signings one of the big names that was still floating out there was Jurickson Profar. And Jurickson Profar had a wonderful season last year with the San Diego Padres, which was his I guess it was technically his second tour of duty with the San Diego Padres. When he was a minor leaguer, he was considered really one of the top prospects in baseball. In fact, before the 2013 season, Baseball America listed him as the number one prospect in baseball. And the year before, he was listed as the number 7. And he had years where he was going to be the next great big thing. And this was a Ranger team that was coming off of, in 2011, winning the World Series by one Nelson Cruz leap. They missed winning the division in 2012 by one Josh Hamilton clank off the glove, and missed going to the playoffs in 2013 by losing a one-game playoff against the Tampa Bay Rays. But Profar's career didn't turn out the way that Ranger fans were drooling about. He suffered through injuries, including missing all of 2014. He didn't play at all in 2015 in the major league level. And when he came back with Texas in 2016 and 17, he barely played. He played a full season in 2018 at age 25. But, even though he had some decent home runs, he was an average player. He found his way over to the A's, and he spent 1 year with the A's. And A's fans liked him. He played a full year, hit some homers, but he didn't hit very well. Found himself in San Diego, and the player who was supposed to be the next great shortstop in baseball had been converted to an outfielder. If you're an outfielder, you don't really hit. Well, then you bounce around. And then something happened. He went to Colorado, which is always a good place to boost your numbers up, and that didn't do that great. Wound up back in San Diego. And this year, everything clicked. His age 31 season, everything clicked. He made the all-star team. He was a silver slugger. He hit well. He had a good average. He had good on-base percentage, had a pretty good OPS, plus, and got on base a bunch. And he was an excellent player for a San Diego Padres team that looked like they were going to go pretty far until they were thwarted by the Dodgers in the final 2 games. And while he didn't exactly shine in the postseason, he was a solid player. Now, the Padres are having a bizarre offseason. and which could be in the middle of a soap opera, and Jurickson Profar packed up and signed with the Atlanta Braves. It wasn't a massive deal. It was more money than I'm going to make. The 3-year, $42 million deal, which seems pretty smart. He's 31 years old, which is not ancient, but it's also not young in baseball terms. And so, he's not going to get a 7-8 year deal, but it's a good deal for him. He gets 3 years. And for the Braves, you're probably get one good year out of him. Next year will probably be pretty good. And if you can squeeze 2, that's great. If you squeeze 2, then the third one is the equivalent of signing a 1-year deal. And you're not completely chaining yourself to a long-term deal. And it seems like it's a smart move for the Atlanta Braves. Now, there have been a lot of criticism going on about the Braves offseason this year. Chipper Jones, who is a Hall of Fame player and one of the great Braves figures of all time. It's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, is he? I mean, he became famous because the fact that he is a terrific baseball player. He's not anywhere because he's like, oh, this guy, he's an intellect. This guy is a real intellect. No, he's a dumb jock, and obviously has great ties to the Braves. And it's like, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing? They're not doing enough. All right, well, just hold it on there, Larry. Hold it on there, Larry. Because you take a look and that the signing of Jurickson Profar is not exactly a break the bank, completely off the charts type move. He was it was a good, solid signing. And they also, lest we forget, picked up Brian De La Cruz. And Brian De La Cruz is someone who is talented. And all of a sudden you look up and say, wait a minute. They picked up Brian De La Cruz and Jurickson Profar. And neither one are signed to prohibitive contracts. But neither one are going to be there for, long-term deals that may be an anchor. And with that, let me tell you something. The Braves are smart. The Braves are very smart. I talked about this on a podcast just ago. On just 11 days ago, I did a podcast about the Braves offseason. And the fact that it was an offseason that may not be the sexiest, but is actually pretty smart. Jeffrey Humphreys, who's a regular listener, commented on it, and he said, thanks for keeping it real about the Braves. So many fans can understand that Atlanta's in great shape without making any big moves. They'll be fine once everyone's healthy. And I think he's right that I'm right. So, good job with your analysis there, Sully. But when you take a look at this Braves team, and this is the same point I made the other day, but it's worth making again. The Braves did not win the division last year, and they barely hung on to a playoff spot. They won as many games as the Mets, and for the Diamondbacks, as that matter. And it just so happened that the Braves lost to a San Diego Padres team that clobbered them in the face, as the Braves could not start Chris Sale in that short series. They let Charlie Morton go, and they let Max Fried go. But they still have really about as good a starting staff as you can have. They probably need another reliever. And in fact, one of our listeners, Jeffrey Humphreys, you're on here. Hey, good to see you. I'm shouting you out, Jeffrey Humphreys. They do need a good reliever. But do you know what are available relievers? And yes, Minter is gone. Yes, Charlie Morton is gone. Yes, Max Fried is gone. But they brought in a good, talented player like De La Cruz. They brought in another good, talented player like Profar. And maybe Acuna Jr. is healthy. But they have Michael Harris, who's a good player. Jared Kelenic, you don't know what you're going to get from him, maybe something. You do know you got Matt Olson. You do know you got Ozzie Albies. You do know you still have some good hitters in that lineup. And now you're adding Profar and Dela Cruz. And you still have about as good a starting rotation in baseball, even without Fried and even without Morton. And what this does for me, as someone who follows baseball and sort of sees patterns in baseball, this Braves team is starting to remind me of a team that had a lot of success about a decade and a half ago. And if my hunch is correct, this is the sort of thing that should make Braves fans very excited. Hey, let's hear from our good friends over at SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. And the same thing goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage for up to $5 million, no medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. In the 2000s and the 2010s, the St. Louis Cardinals were in the playoffs year in and year out. And along the way, they made some decisions that were kind of gut checks. They had a lot of really, really good players on their team, but they also knew to not get overly emotional. You're better off getting a championship year out of a player and letting someone else pay them long term than you being stuck with them. Now, the Cardinals have a reputation of being a cute and fuzzy hometown, old tradition, Cardinals on the bat, going back to the Gas House Gang and Stan Musial and Rogers Hornsby and Bob Gibson and all those great figures. But one thing that you'd have to realize about that great Cardinal run from 2000 to around let's be kind and say 2015, about a 15-year run they had where they were consistently in the playoffs. They went to the league championship series many times. They went to the World Series several times and won a pair of titles along the way for their troubles. This Braves team is starting to remind me of that team. They've already been going on a wonderful run. If you take a look at the way they've been since the end of the 2010s, they're frequently in the postseason. They are a regular participant in the playoffs. And some years they go really far, and some years they don't. And they have signed some of their players to long-term deals, to be sure. And they've kept some of their players from walking. But they also know, as they've gone on a stretch where every year since 2018 they've been in the playoffs, kind of like that stretch that St. Louis had, they also know it's better off to have the team say goodbye to beloved players, even ones who delivered a World Series title, than tie them up via, well, some sense of nostalgia. The Larry Walkers and the Scott Rowlands of the world walked. Hell, Albert Pujols walked and went to other teams. And then all of a sudden, you look up and they've acquired other players. Some of them, they patchwork together. They'll pick up a player who was a reclamation project, like a Jeff Suppan, like a Jeff Weaver. Lots of Jeffs. And they do well. Help them win a title. Help them get to the playoffs. Then they say goodbye to them. Some other team picks them up, and they pick up another player along the way. Now, Colin Dahlin says, what's your opinion on their sustainability with so many injury-prone players and older players? Look at what the Cardinals did back then. They were filled with injury-prone players, and what did they do? What did the Cardinals do? They picked up reinforcements along the way, knowing they don't have to be a superstar. They just have to do their job for the rest of the season. That's exactly what Atlanta did in 2021 when they lost their whole damn outfield and replaced it with Soler, Rosario, and Jock Peterson. Are they going to have some injury-prone players? Sure. There's going to be some injuries. Great. Will Jurickson, Profar, or De La Cruz equal Ronald Acuna Jr. in their prime? No, but Matt Adams didn't, and Alan Craig didn't equate Albert Pujols in his prime, but it made sure first base wasn't a hole. This is a smart team. They have older players, but they've let some older players walk. Max Fried was one of their World Series heroes. They would never have clinched the World Series in 2021 without Max Fried. Have the Yankees pay him. Charlie Morton was a solid pitcher. Was part of the 2021 team. Have him skedaddle somewhere else. Have him break down on someone else's dime. And yeah, they had a great reclamation with Chris Sale. I think they're going to bring, there are relief pitchers who are floating around out there. Let the Mets pay for A.J. Minter as he's going into his 30s. And some other relief pitcher you're not even thinking about is going to show up with the Braves. And this is one of the points I want to make with the Braves. They don't let nostalgia rule the roost. Freddie Freeman's great. He's fantastic. Didn't work out. They'll bring in Matt Olson. They'll move on and keep making the playoffs. And they may get swept out of it, or they may have a year where everything clicks. The teams that won the World Series for St. Louis weren't necessarily the best teams. The 06 team barely made the playoffs. They weren't that good. Same with the 2011. The 2009 Cardinal team was a hell of a lot better than the 2006, and the best team of all of them was the 2005 one, the one where Albert Pujols homered off of Brad Lidge. But remember, that team didn't win the pennant. But they know, don't let nostalgia rule the roost. Just keep putting winning products on the field. If you lose a star, get good players. Get reclamation project. Get someone like a De La Cruz or Profar who want to show that they can perform on the big stage. Do you want a big splashy moves? The Mets made a bunch of big splashy moves a few years ago when they brought in Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. Both of them were on the trade block midway through that very year. Actually, Scherzer came in the year before. Okay, before someone's fact-checked me. But still, you see lots of teams put out huge, huge showcases over the offseason and sit as the playoff show and go, oh, what happened? What happened? And Atlanta is going to be one of those teams who picks up players, falls right under the radar, and you'll say, oh, man, who would have thought that that was the big move? They'll pick up a reliever, Jeffrey Humphreys. They'll pick up one before spring training starts, or there'll be some reliever who's currently pitching. I almost said Richmond. I'm so used to Richmond being their AAA team. There'll be some play on the minors. There'll be some invite. Someone will fill in, and you go, my God, I didn't even know they were still cashing a check. Yeah, they're still cashing a check. When you look at the team that won the World Series, you know, there were some in 2021. Yeah, there were some big time stars on that team. You know, Freddie Freeman certainly comes to mind. And, you know, Acuna Jr. was having a MVP caliber season before he was sidelined. We take a look. Yes, Will Smith had a terrific year as a closer. Were you expecting Tyler Matzek or Luke Jackson or A.J. Minter to be big, huge contributors? For God's sakes, like the Drew Smileys of the world picked up a World Series ring for their trouble. You know, it's a Chris Martin comes in and throws a bunch of quality innings from out of the pen. This is a smart organization. And sometimes they don't get the credit for that because they don't make the big sexy moves. But you know what the biggest sexy move is? Playing in October. If you play in October with a halfway decent starting rotation and a good lineup, what do you have a chance to do? You have a chance to dance past a lot of teams that make big, huge moves. I'm not saying they're going to win the World Series. All I'm saying is they might. And if they do, it'll be with some of those moves that may be sliding under the radar, but will be bright and loud come October. Hey, let's hear from our good friends over at FanDuel. You know, this is that period of the year where I actually pay a little bit of attention to the football season. And with that, from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate with a variety of bets to keep every game exciting. And we got some exciting games. The Commanders of Washington and the Eagles of Philadelphia, the Chiefs of Kansas City, the Bills of Buffalo. Which one of those two teams are going to be playing in the Super Bowl? What I want to see are the Eagles versus the Bills. What I would bet on? Do you want me to bet on the Bills? Because why not? Because I probably can't clear enough money if I bet on the Chiefs. But you know what? If one of my bets does win, I'm going to get $300 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. As someone who is just a couple of questions here. Ninja Squirrel says, Braves roster healthy, can't be any worse than last season. Can't be any worse. They won 89 games, made the playoffs. Tough crowd. What do you think will happen to Brian De La Cruz? I think he'll have a good year. I think he's a good player. He's been a good player before. I think he's going to be a good player now. Do I think he's going to be a superstar? No. Do I think they need a superstar? No. I think he's going to be a good player. You have a team full of good players, that's what you got. By the way, a team that was filled with good players was the Red Sox team that I grew up rooting for in the late 70s, early 80s. Just as my knowledge of baseball, my joy of baseball was beginning in the late 1970s, early 1980s, two of my favorite Red Sox players suddenly were no longer part of the Red Sox. And I didn't understand why. Why? Someone explained to me why Fred Lynn and Butch Hobson and Rick Burleson and Carlton Fisk all went away. Well, I'll tell you why. Because the Red Sox were stupid. The Red Sox had two players who should have been Red Sox for life. Superstar Carlton Fisk. You remember him waving the fair ball? Hall of Famer. In the end, played more games with the White Sox than he did with the Red Sox. I wish I was making that up. And Freddie Lynn, who became the first player to win the Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same year, and arguably had a much better year in 1979. These were two legit all-stars, homegrown superstars. And they were both gone after the 1980 season because of a mail blunder. They had contracts agreed with both Fisk and with Lynn. And they put the contracts in the mail a day late, postmarked a day late. Now, for those of you who don't understand what that means, there was a period of time you had to use something called the mail, not send a PDF, not send a text. You had to put it in the mail, and they stamped it with a timestamp. And the Red Sox put the contracts for these two superstar players in the mail too late. And Carlton Fisk, through arbitration, when they said, yeah, you didn't mail it in time, became a free agent, and the White Sox gobbled him up. And he became an all-star and hit a home run every time he came back to Fenway. And in the end, played more games for the White Sox than he did the Red Sox. He was still an all-star in 1991. This was before the 81 season. And Freddie Lynn, they worked it out that they realized he was about to be a free agent, and they quickly dealt him off to the California Angels in a deal that was just a disaster, bringing in Frank Tanana, who was almost immediately injured as Lynn continued to be an all-star. Now, he was no longer the superstar MVP, but he still was a legit all-star and was the ALCS MVP for the Angels in 1982, while the Red Sox on this sideline looking away. Front office blunders. You know, all the talk of loyalty and staying with a team always seems to be on the side of, all that pressure seems to be on the player. Your loyalty to this, loyalty to that. And we heard some of that from some people talk about Juan Soto's loyalty to the Yankees, which I think we can all agree is stupider than stupid. He spent one more year in the Yankees than I did. I mean, let's pump the brakes on that a little bit. Like, oh, why isn't he loyal to this or that? Like, so people are saying like the Mets, that Pete Alonso should sign with the Mets, even if it isn't for the biggest amount of money, to be loyal to the organization. Meanwhile, you had two stars, a homegrown kid from New Hampshire in Carlton Fisk, who grew up rooting for the Red Sox, and Fred Lynn, who has said over and over again, he never wanted to leave the Reds. He didn't want to leave a lineup where he had Jim Rice and Dwight Evans and Carl Yastrzemski and playing in a ballpark which was ideal for his swing. Think he wanted to leave that? But the loyalty has to come also from the ownership as well. How much of that was the ownership making a mistake, and how much of that was trying to find a way to shed them? We'll never know for sure. But we do know that one of the reasons why the Red Sox couldn't win a World Series for a long time had very little to do with the curse of the Bambino, despite my appearance on HBO. It had a hell of a lot more to do with incompetent owners. Now, it's one thing to let a player walk and let him decay on someone else's team. Cardinals did that like crazy during the 2000s. It's another thing to let players walk because you're stupid. And maybe that was a team I grew up rooting for. But there you go. This has been fun. The Braves, the Dodgers are the team that everyone's saying, oh, are they ruining baseball? Are they ruining baseball? I'm going to talk about that over the weekend, because if I hear one more person say that, I'm going to flip a table. But do you know what? The Braves may be the one actually playing deep. They're making smart moves. They're a smart team. Like those Cardinal teams of the 2000s and the 2010s. They're not going to win every year, but if you stay patient, you're going to see a couple World Series for your troubles. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram at Sully Baseball Podcast. Every once in a while, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm at Sully Baseball there, or just leave a comment right down here on YouTube. Talking about the Braves making smart moves, and on the anniversary of the Red Sox, making dumb moves. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.